Hello, my name is Chloe Folan, and this video is a follow-on video from the video I just released around the updates of stages of building the Rainbow Bridge and Qurana stages of building the Rainbow Bridge. So while I do appreciate that that video was a long video, it was about an hour, may I please suggest that that video should be watched first to put this video into deeper context. As with all my videos, I will ask that before you form an opinion, to please fact check and cross-reference yourself what I'm about to talk about in this particular video. The other video as well, but in particular, this one. This is the type of video that will need to be watched more than once, and to fully understand what I'm trying to talk about, you will need to do some cross-referencing and research, but my hope is that this video will give you some proper pinpoint reference points that are honest and stable to work from. That's the hope. So bear with me, please, while I do my absolute best to talk about this issue that has layers to it, that crops up again and again and again. I would like to, first of all, please give some proper reference points, some deeper ones, before I get into this topic more deeply, because I do believe that for what I'm about to talk about to be understood better, I need to give some background reference points. The Rainbow Bridge techniques that are also known as the soul star clearing techniques. The soul star clearing techniques were created by the late Josephine and Norman Stevens. Josephine and Norman Stevens were deeply linked to Lucis Trust and the Arcane School. Josephine Stevens was Alice A. Bailey's personal secretary for a number of years and helped Alice A. Bailey compile 2 out of the 24 books. Now, 22 of them were mainly dictated to Alice A. Bailey telepathically by Ascended Master Dwell Cool. But 2 out of those particular 22 books, but there's 24 of them, Josephine helped Alice A. Bailey compile 2 of those books and was Alice A. Bailey's personal secretary for a number of years. And she also deeply supported the Arcane School and Lucis Trust activities in the early stages of the Arcane School. Norman Stevens was the director of Lucis Trust for 7 years. So while all of that and more was going on, Josephine and Norman Stevens, through helping to compile and anchor the teachings and writings that Ascended Master Dwell Cool was telepathically dictating to Alice A. Bailey, as all of that was happening, although they did claim to have a deep, intimate soul connection with Ascended Master Dwell Cool's ashram and hierarchy, and that's obvious from what they write, and also their karmic connections, why they were alive. But more to the point, apologies, I've lost my train of thought. There's a few things I'm trying to discuss. So as all of that was happening, Norman and Josephine, from a soul level and also a personal level, as all of the information is coming through Alice A. Bailey from Ascended Master Dwell Cool, They received the inspiration because of everything that was written about the central channel, condition of the auric field, as all of that information was coming through all of those writings, all of those high caliber writings. They had the inspiration. Could we create a technique that would resolve and dissolve all karmic imbalance in one lifetime and enforce building the light body? So they started to get together Rainbow Bridge prototype groups. And in particular, phase 1 was tested for nearly 10 years before it was publicly released. So where I'm now going with this is I'm now trying to explain a Rainbow Bridge connection. Dr. Ronald Tiggle was a direct student of Norman Stevens while Norman Stevens was still alive. His website that I always reference, Dr. Ronald Tiggle's website, is the www.soul1.org website that I have a link to on my website and that I'm always referencing, and that's referenced in the Rainbow Bridge workshops that I give and teach. So the soul1.org website is Dr. Ronald Tiggle's website, and he was a direct student of Norman Stevens while Norman Stevens was still alive. My connection to Rainbow Bridge is mainly through Dr. Ronald Tiggle. I got a lot of the Rainbow Bridge techniques, and still do, and a lot of it from Ron, other sources as well. I'm very blessed to have other people send me other snippets of Rainbow Bridge history. It's a beautiful position to be in. And it's lovely to be able to properly preserve and catalogue deep pieces of Rainbow Bridge history, but I'm trying to explain all of the connection points between Josephine and Norman Stevens, who created the techniques, Lucis Trust, Alice A. Bailey, Ascended Master Dwell Cool, and then also where I'm fitting in to all of that as well. To take this a bit further, the late Anne Merrill was a direct student of Josephine and Norman Stevens. The late Anne Merrill, for good grief, I believe 30 to 40 years, was one of the main public readers and assessors for the Rainbow Bridge techniques. Ron worked closely with Anne Merrill while she was still alive for developing the Rainbow Bridge Phase 2 disc method. So in terms of public readers, now it's interesting, Josephine, as far as I'm aware, never really gave readings, but Josephine Stevens, told Anne Merrill what to look for in terms of auric assessment of students with evolutionary development. So in terms of public readers for the Rainbow Bridge techniques, through the line I come in through, it goes Anne Merrill, me. So now, I don't have a direct connection to Anne Merrill. My connection to the Rainbow Bridge techniques is through Ron. I want to make that abundantly clear. My main connection to the Rainbow Bridge techniques is through Dr. Ronald Tiggle. So with all of that as a reference point, I'm now going to explain some of the biggest mistakes and misinterpretations people make when reading the Bailey books in terms of the proper deep initiations that the Bailey books are describing. And all of that matters with what I'm about to say. So, one of the biggest mistakes, the first one, is the Bailey books were written 5,000 years ahead of their time. So while the books seem to be written in present tense, the Bailey books are present tense for 5,000 years' time, not the current now. So when initiation, the proper deep, now to be clear on that, I'm talking about birth, baptism, transfiguration, crucifixion, those proper deep initiations, that evolutionary line of development that we're all subject to. I'm going to come back to that. The Bailey books seem to be written in present tense. They were not. They were written 5,000 years ahead of their time. So to take the books as a literal now, you would have to transport yourself 5,000 years into the future. 5,000 years into the future, it would be hoped that anyone sitting down reading the books 5,000 years from now, then it would apply to the now. So that's the first mistake people make when they're trying to decipher what the initiations are that are being described. They get way ahead of themselves with misinterpretation, wildly off misinterpretation, just based on that alone. It's present tense, 5,000 years from now. The other point that needs to be highlighted when attempting to read and digest and meditate on the Bailey books is the Bailey books were transcribed to Alice A. Bailey by Ascended Master Dwell-Cool. And at that particular point in time, Ascended Master Dwell-Cool is and was a full 5th degree initiate. So now I do mean that in proper traditional initiation terminology. In hierarchy, he is a proper full 5th degree initiate. And he telepathically, the information in the Bailey books, Alice A. Bailey telepathically transcribed that information from Ascended Master Dwell-Cool. The Bailey books were written for 1st and 2nd degree initiates. And 1st and 2nd degree initiates are not common. When you start to understand the proper reference points for what the probationary path is, what a proper 1st degree is, what a proper 2nd degree is, you'll understand why I'm saying that. Those initiations are not common, and it's actually a compliment to be anywhere near a proper 1st birth initiation in proper traditional terminology, sense, and reference points. And there's reason, I'm going to come back to that. So what I'm trying to very clearly, but as nicely as possible, get across is those books are not books you read like Jane Austen books. They are not bubblegum fiction books. You don't sit down and just flip through it for half an hour and think you've read one of those books. The books were transcribed to Alice A. Bailey by a proper 5th degree, and it's very evident when you understand what you're looking at and the information you're looking at in the books. The books were written to encourage students to develop proper emotional and mental faculties. The books are meant to be thought about, thought through, pondered on, meditated on. So when people read the books and have difficulty with them or read them and go, what? It's because they're not. Because of the origin of the high degree initiate those books came from, that's where that issue lies. That's where that issue lies. It's trying to absorb and understand very high caliber information 5,000 years ahead of its time. It takes time to digest, reflect, and work through those books. And it seriously helps to have somebody who's been meditating on and studying those books, if you will, along with a proper clearing process for, good grief, 30, 40 years. So this is why whenever you're listening to someone who is a proper student of those books say, well, I've been reading and studying those books for 30 years, but I'm still learning. That's what they mean, because they've got a proper reference point for what they're trying to read, study, and learn about. But on the flip side of that, now I've got notes to keep me on track because there's a lot. So I've covered 5,000 years ahead of its time, dictated by Master Dwellcool and Adept, written for first and second degree initiates. Now, I want to come back on that as well. One of the other reasons I'm saying that when you know and understand better what to look for and how to approach reading the books, if you will, you'll understand what I'm saying about how they're high caliber books, clearly written by an adept. And this is where it also gets interesting over describing initiation and explaining to people why, when you understand the proper reference points for proper initiation, it's normal to only be on the probationary path. That's the bulk of humanity at the moment. The bulk of humanity, people incarnating, are only on the probationary path, but that's not an insult. Not common to meet a proper first baptism. It's getting a little more normal, but still a long way to go for that to be more common and more normal. So first baptism initiation is not an insult, nor is the second. And to put it in context, and this will be in the video I'll share of the late and legendary Michael Robbins talking about this. Alice A. Bailey, because I can see people's auric fields in pictures and things of that nature. So even though I should be saying the late Alice A. Bailey, from what I can see in her auric field from when she was alive, Alice A. Bailey would have been around, in proper definition, around a second degree initiate. So what I'm trying to say is the caliber of information in those books could not have come from a second degree initiate. So that's how I know they're genuine. I believe a top psychologist, I forget his name, it was one of them, I think it was Freud, I might be wrong. When the Bailey books started to be publicly released and published, there was a very prominent psychologist, I think it was Freud, I might be wrong, basically said, oh, Alice is getting that information from her subconscious. No. Oh, no. 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 And it's clear when you sit down and read the books what I'm talking about in terms of evolution. So that's how I know the books were genuine. And her ray makeup as well, especially her monadic chakra, would deeply align her with Ascended Master Dwellcool and hierarchy. So even though I believe Annie Besant did question Alice A. Bailey over the existence of Master Dwellcool, I can see why Josephine supported her and worked with her. I would have done the same. With intact inner vision, I can see so many reasons clairvoyantly why those books did not come from Alice A. Bailey. So I'll say it again. Understanding the proper terminology and reference points for a proper second degree, a baptism and a baptism degree initiate, that's not an insult either. And my goodness, you're doing well if you've actually come that far. That's less common than a proper first. When the Bailey books are understood in context, aligning with the Aquarian age we've just come into, we are now coming into the realm of possibility of getting to proper, full transfigurations, but it's even more rare. Even more rare. When you understand the proper terminology and reference points being described in the Bailey books, and it takes time. It takes a lot of time to try to digest, meditate on, understand, everything in between. I'll say it again, those books are not meant to be just flip through in half an hour and think you've understood them. What I love to say to my Rainbow Bridge students is, and like that, I always give advice as well and suggestions. I'll ask someone, if someone's not familiar with the Bailey books, I'll say, okay, what's your main area of interest? And based on their main area of interest, I can recommend a Bailey book that might be more digestible to start with. You know, I like to encourage people, I like to encourage confidence in breaking the barriers of what you're able to know and understand. And this is a fun activity I get my students to do. With your chosen Bailey book, whether you intuitively pick one of them yourself to start with, or I'll give a suggestion, do take some gentle time, say the soul mantra, and then gently open the Bailey book and just don't worry if it's all not making sense. Just gently read the words, understanding it's a meditation. What's written is a meditation. It's not literal writing, so to speak, although words in those books are very deliberate. And bits of information are scattered across different books, which also leads people to massively misinterpret certain things. So pick your favorite book, start your Rainbow Bridge clearing work. If you come across something in one of the Bailey books that's not making full sense, mark that chapter, mark that paragraph. Don't stress about it. Take a break from it. Continue with your Rainbow Bridge clearing work, and then come back to that book and that chapter, and the pennies will drop. It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating. It's such a fun game to play with yourself by understanding you're digesting and reading really high caliber information that is not going to be understood in one day. So play therapy of comprehension of the Bailey books. Rainbow Bridge technique clearing. Pick one book to start with. Pick an area as you're reading or attempting to read the Bailey books. Underscore certain things that maybe aren't making sense. Leave that chapter alone. Continue with your clearing work. Come back to that chapter and penny drop, penny drop, penny drop, penny drop, penny drop. It's fascinating. And the reason why that happens is that's a reflection for you that the Rainbow Bridge techniques are an evolution enforcement technique, because of how you start to be able to more clearly comprehend and understand certain parts of the Bailey books, or just more information seeping in on a deeper level over what is actually written and meant. It's fascinating. Oh my goodness, it's fascinating. So maybe try that yourself. It's interesting. The Rainbow Bridge techniques are available for free, just like the Lucis Trust books I'm talking about are available to read for free online. So I'm trying to stick to my notes today because there's so much to discuss and try to put into one short video. Okay, the other issue. Yes, the other issue, the other massive misinterpretation a lot of people make. The proper deep initiations. What happens to you on the probationary pathway and the auric markers and causation of that? What happens at a proper first birth initiation and the auric markers and causation of that? What happens in the lead up to a second degree initiation and all of the auric markers of that? Those initiations do not happen back to back. And I know a lot of people are watching this going, oh. And this is where you'll need to watch the Michael Robbins video I'm going to share a link to, where, yes, it's a link to his first video talking about, he created compilation videos, extremely exceptional ones, on initiations 1 to 4. But what must be understood, and he clearly talks about this, he's very clear on this, is the 4th initiation is incredibly hard to reach, and it's not common. It's phenomenally rare. And you'll understand why when you get some proper markers in place for what the traditional initiations actually are, and the markers of them, auric and manifestation causation. So in this video, he talks about Alice A. Bailey on the pathway. He talks about, even though it's about the 4th, he comes back and talks about the 2nd, because that's where a lot of people make mix-ups. And as he's talking, you'll hear him say, this stage of development happens in the lead up to this initiation. Then there's this stage and this stage and this stage. These are the stages. These are the causations, plural, that happen between each of the proper deep traditional initiations. They don't happen back to back. And so many people fall afoul of this. It does happen. So if you're reading apparent information on so-called initiation and it's describing one tiny thing and then first initiation, one teeny tiny thing and second baptism initiation, one tiny thing and no. Whoever has written that, and it's evident in what they write, has badly mistaken stages of development between initiations for the proper deep initiations, meaning they're describing buffer stages, not the proper full initiations at all, by any means, not by a long stretch. And I could even show you where, with what they're describing, it's a buffer stage, not the proper full initiation. It's fascinating. I should have a, if there was a PhD in cross-referencing causation claims of different techniques, I would have it. See, this is where people misunderstand me badly as well. The initiations that you'll hear Michael Robbins describing, those initiations, this is the other point, this is the other area where people make a big mix-up. People read the Bailey books and think that's just relative to the Bailey system. No, that is the other big mix-up, huge. The proper initiations that are being described in the Bailey books, the probationary pathway, first initiation, everything that happens in between second initiation, those are universal initiations that we are all subject to. irrespective of the evolution technique being employed. It's not the Bailey system initiations. What's being described by Ascended Master Dwell Cool in the Bailey books are the universal stages of evolution that we are all subject to. The auric markers that Michael Robbins describes for each of the proper deep initiations are the auric markers I can clearly see in anyone, depending on where you are on the evolutionary pathway, no matter what system, no matter what technique you're using or think you've used. Those auric markers being described are evident in you. So this is what I mean about cross-referencing. Whatever technique you give me, whatever initiatory, what would you call it, initiatory description you give me, I will be able to clearly show you where the initiations being described in the Bailey books are a little bit in whatever system you want to show me, or whatever writings you want to show me that someone's claimed around initiation. I'll be able to show you where probationary stages are what happens prior to a proper full birth initiation. And I will be able to show you, no matter what system, no matter what language or terminology has been used or misused, I will be able to show you where it's most of the time only the probationary pathway stages being described, no matter what system or what language. It's evident from what someone writes, and it is reflective in the state of that person's auric field as well. It always matches. It fascinates me completely. So here's the other big mistake people make with me, where they're not making an effort to even just understand what I'm saying. I can see in anyone, minimum, where some of the probationary pathway mini initiations, if you will, are evident. No matter what system, no matter what technique. So this is what I mean. I can pull a thread out of that from any system. What I'm trying to get across as clearly as I can is the initiations described in the Bailey books are universal initiations. Every single person in incarnation is subject to the evolutionary causation being described. Everyone. Here's the other point I'd like to make, because this is where there's other big, massive misinterpretations. We are one race. We are one human race. So no matter what technique being employed, if it's in any way decent, I would be able to see it from what's been written. Some form of what's described in the Bailey books happening. Initiation and evolution enforcement techniques and causation is not wildly different from person to person. There can be slight variations here and there. And I say that if people actually listen to what I'm describing with my Antakarana stages. This thread is usually the first to be woven. This petal is usually the first one to be open. So while there can be mild variations here and there, the variations are not massively different from person to person when it comes to the evolutionary blueprint we are all subject to with how the human family evolves, with building the light body. I just want to check my notes. Was there anything else I wanted to highlight? Now, yes. So for those who've even just listened, I never said believe. I said for those that have just taken time out of their precious day just to hear me out and listen. If you're hearing me and going, oh my goodness, Chloe, I want to know more about this. I want to investigate this deeper. There is a video in the link below this one linking to the legendary, but he unfortunately passed away last year. I was crushed when I found out about it. The legendary Michael Robbins discussing, yes, his first video on the 4th initiation, but I'll say it again, he goes back to describe the other initiations as well. It's an hour-long video, so please have a notebook and pen. But if you do properly listen to the full length of that particular video, and then listen to any of my videos where I'm talking about stages of building the rainbow bridge, it'll click like that. What is going on and what I'm trying to describe, and just the decent, solid information I'm trying to get out there more widely. Everything I've just said will make crystal clear sense to you if you watch Michael's video and then compare it to any of my Antikorana videos. I promise you. So on that note, I'll put a link down to one of my videos on Antikorana thread weaving as well for cross-referencing. Notice I didn't say comparison, I said cross-referencing. So on that note, as always, I sincerely hope this video has provided good food for thought, provided some very interesting insights and some really clear pointers and markers for healthier direction in properly esoterically understanding what is meant with the terminology around probationary pathway, birth initiation, the stages in between, baptism initiation, stages in between, third transfiguration initiation, if you're lucky. And I'll say it again, if you want to understand why I keep saying that and why I keep saying those initiations are rare, the Michael Robbins video will clear it up just like that. So on that note, wishing everyone positive, clarifying energies, wishing everyone good insights with continued personal enlightenment, understanding, and growth. And as always, 7 ray blessings to all.